in your essay, it asks you to give example how the Progressive Era sought to deal with the problems of mass immigration, urbanization, economic concentration, big business. And I asked you to give me on the city level, state level, and federal level. The next guy I'm about to talk about is a progressive reformer on the city level. His name is Hazen Pingree. Kid from Maine, born, just let me give you a quick background of this guy. Pretty good picture. That's from about 1860. He's from Maine. He goes to school till he's 14. Then his parents say, sorry son, you're going to have to go to the mills. So he works in cotton mills till he's 20. Then he goes into a shoe factory where he's working there. And I kind of think he must have had kind of a pseudo-managerial role there. But then he gets drafted in the war and he fights the Civil War. He's at a prison camp in the South, and he meets some guys from Michigan, and they're saying, man, when this war's over, come to Detroit. It is the happening place. And so he decides to move to Detroit. And he's got some money from the war, veterans pay, and some money he's saved, and he buys into a factory, a shoe factory in Detroit, and it becomes one of America's biggest shoe factories. It has 700 employees, and he becomes a very wealthy man. And he's a nice guy, a good guy, didn't forget his humble backgrounds he came from. And the property people of Detroit get fed up with the corrupt administration of the mayor's office. Remember that guy I told you about, Shame of the Cities? One of the cities they were talking about was Detroit, and how they had this corrupt political organization under a Republican mayor. And they want a reformer to come in, and they asked this businessman if he would stand for mayor. And he says he's too busy at first, but finally decides to run as mayor. But here's the interesting thing I want you to know about. He is a corporation guy, but when he takes over the city, he does a lot of things to help the people where they're being exploited by a few corporations. He goes after, here's what I want you to know, there's a monopoly there in electricity. There's a company that brought electricity to Detroit, but there's only one company now, and it's got a monopoly. And so he forms what he calls a Public Service Commission, which has the power to regulate the rates they charge, because they've got a monopoly on them. The Interstate Commerce Act back in 1985 had said that the federal government can strike down rates if they're unfair. So he's thinking he can do that with electric corporations. Now he has a hard time with this company, so you know what he ends up doing? He starts a municipal electric company. And that's what we have today, right? Municipal electric companies that are publicly owned. Because what we decide as a society is it's not good to have something that we're all dependent on run for a profit, because they can charge whatever rates they want when they're a monopoly. So he sets up the first municipal electric company, or one of the first ones. Also, the rail cars, the street cars in Detroit, were also owned privately. And they were charging very high rates, and people needed those rail cars. And so he starts his own public railroad company to compete with those private businesses. And then what do we have today for public transportation, right? I mean, it's public. To say public transportation means it's a service that the government offers to society, charging prices for it, but not running it for a profit. So another, this is an innovation during the Progressive period. He also takes on city lighting as a way. We didn't have city lights until this period of time. They used to be privately owned, and he does public lights. In 1893, when he is mayor, there's a horrible economic downturn in America, and all these people are thrown out of work. And he becomes known as Potato Patch Pingree. Because he and his wife are driving around the city one time. They were all concerned about all these people who don't have any jobs, and he wonders how they're making any food. And his wife says, wow, there's vacant lots here and there around the town. What if people could have a garden? Because they live in, rental units in these big buildings. So he gets the city council to this is him plowing up these gardens. And what happens is he gets people around the city to come. They can have a patch, a plot, that they can grow what they call a garden truck on there. Just things that can keep them alive. So this is his attitude of, I want my government to be an assistance to the people of Detroit. And so he's the beginning of that. Also, he starts some public building projects during this period of time. And he wants to employ people who are out of work. He actually has an agency go around buildings and looking into the conditions of families and say, you know, you all need work, we've got an opportunity here. He's not Boss Tweed from New York City, who's using all this to make money for himself. He's a good governor. He's a good leader. And so during the time he becomes famous in America. Now what I want you to know is he's not the only one. I'm only giving you guys models. Because now somebody runs for mayor of Philadelphia and says, I'm going to be like Pingree. We're going to do the Public Service Commission. And we're going to do public utilities. So it's just this progressive attitude. Interestingly, he's taking on his own property group, right? Because he's a Republican. He's going after, I got the word over there, stalwart. He's a progressive Republican, and he's up over the conservative stalwarts. Now, the next famous one is this guy named Robert Lafollette. And on your ID list, it says the Wisconsin plan, but I really just want you to call him Robert. I'm going to just do Robert Lafollette. He's also a progressive Republican, and he's going after the old Republicans don't like him. They're called stalwarts, S-T-A-L-W-A-R-T. A stalwart is somebody who doesn't want to budge, somebody who doesn't want to change. He wants to change. That's why they're called progressives. How can we alter things to make them better? He managed to become governor of Wisconsin. And he wants to tackle so many problems in Wisconsin. He knows the railroads and the other corporations in Wisconsin have been controlling government. He's worried about the workers, and he's worried about consumers. And he's worried about the poor kids who work in bad conditions. And he wants answers, and he wants new programs for the government. Now, what he does is he brings in the University of Wisconsin faculty to help guide him. And he gets these experts on commissions. They're actually what are called ex officio. They're not paid employees of the state. They are helping contribute to legislation. And I'll give you another example of that in a little while when I talk about something called the Wainwright Commission in New York. He knows that a lot of the representatives don't have the best data, and he wants to drive public policy on actual data. So he sets up something called the Legislative Reference Bureau, so that they can have data on where people are, what's happening, and then using experts to imagine what they can do. He brings in a sociologist who's interested in labor economics to try to imagine what better conditions could be made for laborers. Can we get an 8-hour standard day? Can we get a 40-hour work week? Can we require the paying of overtime? Can we establish minimum wages? Can we look for workplace safety? Can we have a workman's compensation program? Right? So these are all the things that they are imagining they are doing in Wisconsin. If you're going to have government workers serving the public, that's called civil service, they'd better be competent and professional and public-minded. In the past, every time a governor would come to the governor's mansion, they'd fire all the Wisconsin state employees and hire their own. But as you guys might remember with the Pendleton Act, we're beginning to realize that we need competent, professional, public-spirited workers to work for the government. And so he starts a new civil service law which will lay out job descriptions, job requirements, education requirements, and they become long-term professional employees. So this is how America is growing good public institutions. Public utilities law, this is very interesting. There's monopolies in Milwaukee and Madison and some of the other larger cities, electrical monopolies. And he wants them to restrain themselves in what they charge people. When you go into business, don't you want to make as much money as you can, right? By selling a service, that's very natural. These people don't have anywhere else to buy electricity from, and so they are making pretty high rates of return. It's understandable as a capitalist, if you risk your capital, you want a big return. What he begins to argue is this: you're not really facing a lot of risk in the marketplace. You're not risking your capital. You're the only game in town. We can either break you up into competing ones, but we actually see the benefit of having one company because there's certain efficiencies. But because the public is so much at stake here, their interests, we've got to get you guys to constrain how much money you're going to make. So he gets a law passed, and I don't remember this is the exact amount, but he wants the company to make a return on investment of about 8%. He thinks that's a fair arrangement. People buy bonds in your company, they buy stocks in your company, but the company should only be making about 8% return on investment. It doesn't need to be making 45, 50% return on investment. So, well, how do we guarantee this, right? You're going to have to open your books to our Public Service Commission. They want to see your books. You show us your quarterly statements. You show us what it costs for you in manpower, what it costs you in capital improvements, what it costs you in depreciation in your equipment, what your salaries were to your management, what you paid in bonds, what you paid in coal, what you paid in all these things. And at the end of the day, you made this much money. And as you can imagine, a company sets its rates based on what its expenses are, and then at the end of the day, they want to have a profit. So let's say they were charging, I don't know, $1.22 per kilowatt hour, and it turns out that that's a 42% return on the investment. What are they going to have to do to their rates? What will they have to do? Yeah, they have to lower their rates. Could come down to 98 cents a kilowatt hour. What do you think the people in Milwaukee think about that? That's awesome. It's going to lower their rates. So this is government intervention in the economy, setting maximum prices. What do you think the utility company, private utility company thinks about that? They don't like it. They're going to say this is socialism. This is our private property being told what rate we can charge. But what the American people decide is there are some sectors of the economy which are so critical to the welfare of the community that the free market can't be allowed to be unfettered there. Do y'all see this is a big issue in political economy. Capitalists, the capital class does not like it. He says, you know what, if your investors don't like it, they can put their money somewhere else. This could be part of their portfolio. 8% return on investment is a very decent amount of money. And this is where America goes. And we like it as Americans, and we're comfortable there. We don't want the government telling our retailers how much they can charge for a shirt, but when it comes to critical areas, we're into it. And that's what he pulls off there. Also, education expansion. He wants free, good education through high school. And he wants to make it compulsory, like 100 days a year. How are you going to pay for that? We need more revenue. One thing he does is goes after corporations. Because corporations control the political party, they were able to escape from taxation. And so he wants a plan to tax the railroad companies some and the other companies. And they're like, who are you? And what are you doing in my pocketbook? Public health. A lot of people can't afford to get treatment for tuberculosis or for other diseases. And so he starts thinking, well, maybe it'd be good if we controlled disease in Milwaukee. And so we provide money to hire a doctor and some nurses, and even provide some medicine paid for at public expense in order to safeguard the public more. Public health department. But this is where it all started from. He gets something passed called the direct primary. The way it was before direct primaries, the party bosses would decide who was going to be the leader. And those guys were corrupt. So this is an effort to make democracy less corrupt and more responsive to the people. Because now, in May, they might have 7 candidates. And the people get to determine for their party who's going to be on in November. And that is much more responsive. It's an improvement in our democratic process. It also makes it so that the public can initiate things, referendums, initiative like propositions to be added to as laws if the legislature's not doing anything, referendum to recall laws. This is all considered to be this great increase in democracy. It's called the laboratory of democracy, is what Wisconsin becomes known as. And here's something I'd like you to come away with in your education about the United States. When we face problems, a trend begins to develop. Certain states lead the way. In this case, Wisconsin becomes known as a laboratory of democracy because they're trying all these new approaches to government. But other states will follow suit. Pretty soon you're going to have a reformed governor in Pennsylvania, and a reformed governor in West Virginia, and a reformed governor in Ohio. And Lafollette is beginning to have conferences and talking to other governors, right?